A homeowner in Ohio spent $40,000 renovating her kitchen, and less than a year later, water was dripping straight through her brand new ceiling. The strange part is that her roof looked completely fine from the ground. No missing shingles, no storm damage, no obvious sign that anything was wrong. But hidden just a few inches above her ceiling drywall was a piece of bent metal, barely visible, that had failed silently for months, and by the time anyone noticed, the damage was already done. If you're someone who owns a home, plans to buy one, or just loves uncovering the hidden mistakes that cost people thousands of dollars, subscribe now, because every week we dig into real construction failures most people never see coming until it's too late. That piece of metal is called flashing, and if you've never heard of it, you're not alone. Most homeowners live their entire lives without knowing it exists. It doesn't get mentioned in home tours. It's rarely something buyers ask about during inspections. And yet, flashing might be the single most important material standing between a dry, safe home and a slow, expensive disaster. Picture a roof, seen from above, stripped down to its skeleton. Wooden rafters, plywood decking, and underlayment stretched across like skin. Now imagine every place where that smooth surface gets interrupted. A chimney rising through the shingles, a skylight cut into the slope, a wall meeting the roof line at an angle, a vent pipe poking through. Every single one of those intersections is a weak point, a place where two different materials meet, and where water desperately wants to find its way inside. Flashing is the thin metal barrier installed at exactly those weak points. Its entire job is deceptively simple. Redirect water away from the gap before it can seep through. When it's installed correctly, it's invisible, doing its job quietly for decades. When it's installed wrong, even slightly wrong, it becomes one of the most dangerous mistakes in residential construction, because the damage it causes doesn't show up right away. At first, nothing seems out of place. The roof looks new, the shingles are straight. From the street, everything about the house looks perfect. But here's where everything changes. Inside the attic, in the dark, unseen space above the ceiling, a small gap in the flashing around that chimney has been letting in moisture every time it rains. It starts small, a few drops of water sneaking behind the metal during a heavy storm. The wood decking absorbs it, and because wood is porous, it doesn't show visible staining right away. Weeks pass, then months. Each rainfall adds a little more moisture. The plywood begins to soften from the inside, like a sponge that's been slowly saturated but hasn't yet started to drip. Most homeowners never notice this stage because there's nothing to notice. No stain, no smell, no visible sag. The problem is working silently, hidden behind drywall and insulation, completely invisible to anyone living inside the house. This is where professional roofers and inspectors see something most people miss entirely. They know that flashing failures rarely announce themselves immediately. They know to check the transitions first, the valleys, the step flashing along a dormer wall, the counter flashing wrapped into brick, because these are the places where cheap shortcuts hide the longest before they become visible problems. Now compare two chimneys side by side. On one, a roofer took the time to install step flashing, individual L-shaped metal pieces woven into each row of shingles as they go up the slope, each piece overlapping the one below it like fish scales, creating a layered path that always sends water downward and away from the chimney. On the other, someone used a single long strip of metal, caulked along the top edge, and called it finished. The difference isn't visible from the ground. Both chimneys look identical in photographs, but one of them will handle 20 years of rain, snow melt, and thermal expansion without a single leak. The other is a slow-motion disaster, and the caulking that's supposed to seal it will crack within a few years as the metal expands and contracts with temperature swings, opening a gap that lets water sneak in every single time it rains. This is the biggest mistake almost nobody notices: the reliance on caulk and sealant instead of proper mechanical flashing. Caulk is meant to be a secondary defense, a small reinforcement, not the primary barrier against water. But on countless roofs across the country, contractors use it as a shortcut, smearing a bead of sealant where a properly layered piece of metal should be doing the real work. It looks finished, it looks professional, and it fails almost every time. Just not immediately. What happens next surprised even the homeowner in that Ohio kitchen story. The wood decking above her ceiling had been silently absorbing moisture for so long that it started to lose its structural integrity. It softened. It weakened. Mold began growing in the dark, damp space where nobody could see it, spreading quietly along the underside of the roof deck and into the insulation below. By the time water actually dripped through her ceiling, the damage had already spread far beyond a single stain. The plywood needed to be replaced. The insulation, soaked and useless, had to be torn out. And when contractors opened the ceiling to investigate, they found black mold had crept along nearly 6 feet of framing, a health hazard that required specialized remediation before any repairs could even begin. What started as a tiny metal detail, a flashing piece installed the wrong way, had turned into a 5-figure repair. The kitchen renovation she was so proud of had to be partially undone just to fix the damage bleeding down from above. But the biggest mistake hadn't even happened yet in her situation. When the original roof was installed years earlier, the contractor had reused the old flashing instead of replacing it. This happens more often than most people realize. Flashing is expensive and time-consuming to install correctly. So during re-roofing projects, some contractors simply strip off the old shingles, lay down new ones, and leave the original flashing in place to save money and time. The problem is that flashing ages. Metal expands and contracts with every temperature swing throughout the year. Over 15 or 20 years, that constant movement causes tiny cracks, loosened nail holes, and shifted seams. Reusing old flashing on a brand new roof is like putting new tires on a car but keeping the same worn brake pads. Everything looks fresh on the surface, but the part doing the real protective work is already compromised. This hidden detail changes everything about how a roof should be evaluated. A shiny new roof with fresh shingles can still be hiding decades-old flashing underneath, quietly failing in ways that won't show up for months or even years after installation. Now imagine a cross-section view, cutting straight through a roof valley, the V-shaped channel where 2 roof slopes meet and funnel rainwater down toward the gutters. This is one of the highest pressure areas on any roof because water from 2 entire sections of roofing gets concentrated into one narrow path. If the valley flashing underneath is too narrow, too thin, or improperly overlapped, this single spot can dump gallons of water into a home during a single heavy storm. Professional roofers understand that valleys need wider flashing than almost any other part of the roof, sometimes woven carefully beneath the shingles on both sides, sometimes left exposed in a style called open valley flashing, where the metal is visible and shingles are cut back on either side to let water flow freely down the center. Both methods work when done correctly, but a rushed installation where flashing is too narrow or nailed directly through the center where water flows creates a fast track for leaks that can dump water into an attic within minutes during a serious downpour. Now comes the part that costs homeowners the most money: the slow structural damage that happens when a leak goes undetected for years instead of months. Wood framing that stays wet repeatedly doesn't just rot, it loses its strength. Rafters and trusses that were engineered to hold specific loads become compromised, sometimes to the point where they can no longer safely support snow loads or the weight of the roof itself. In serious cases, homeowners discover sagging roof lines, and by then, the fix isn't a simple flashing repair anymore. It's structural framing replacement, which can cost tens of thousands of dollars and require the roof to be partially opened up from above. There was one critical mistake almost nobody talks about, and it happens around skylights more than almost anywhere else on a roof. Skylights create a large rectangular opening cut directly through the roof deck, and they require flashing on all four sides, plus specific step flashing along the sloped edges, and a special piece called head flashing above the top edge to divert water around the entire opening. Picture two identical skylights side by side. On one, the installer used a complete flashing kit designed specifically for that skylight model, with each piece interlocking precisely to create a continuous, layered barrier against water. On the other, someone attached the skylight directly to the roof deck and simply ran a bead of roofing cement around the edges, treating sealant as if it could replace an entire flashing system. The sealed skylight might survive its first few storms without any visible issue, but sunlight breaks down roofing cement over time, causing it to dry out, shrink, and crack. Once that happens, every storm becomes an opportunity for water to slip past the failing seal and drip directly onto the ceiling below, sometimes running along framing members before it ever becomes visible as a stain, meaning the leak could be entering the home in one spot and showing up as a stain several feet away, making the source incredibly difficult to trace without opening up the ceiling. This is exactly why professional home inspectors treat skylights, chimneys, and roof valleys as priority checkpoints during every inspection. They know these are the areas where corners get cut most often because they take more time, more material, and more skill than simply rolling shingles across a flat, uninterrupted section of roof. At first, it doesn't seem like a serious problem when a homeowner notices a small brown stain on their ceiling. Many people assume it's an old mark or a minor issue that can wait. But that stain is often the very last stage of a process that's been happening silently for a long time. By the time water becomes visible inside the home, it usually means the leak has been active long enough to soak through the roof decking, the underlayment, and the insulation before finally reaching the drywall. This is one of the most important things to understand about flashing failures. They rarely show themselves early. Unlike a missing shingle, which is immediately visible from the street, a flashing problem stays completely hidden until the damage has already spread. This is why regular roof inspections matter so much, especially at points where different roof sections and materials intersect. So what does a properly installed roof actually look like? The version that prevents all of this from ever happening. It starts with new flashing every time a roof is replaced, never reused, regardless of how good the old metal might look on the surface. It continues with step flashing woven correctly into every course of shingles along vertical walls and dormers, each piece overlapping the one below to guide water consistently downward. It includes properly sized valley flashing, wide enough to handle concentrated water flow from two roof slopes at once. And around every chimney, skylight, and vent pipe, it means complete flashing systems designed for that specific application, not universal sealant applied as a substitute for real metalwork. The materials matter too. Galvanized steel, aluminum, and copper are the most common flashing materials, each with different lifespans and different reactions to the materials around them. Copper flashing, for instance, can last well beyond 50 years, but it has to be installed with care around certain other metals to avoid a chemical reaction called galvanic corrosion, where two different metals touching each other in the presence of moisture actually accelerate corrosion in one of them. A skilled roofer knows which metals can touch and which ones need a barrier between them, a detail that inexperienced installers frequently overlook. Preventing all of this comes down to a few things any homeowner can actually control. Choosing a roofing contractor who explains their flashing process specifically, rather than glossing over it as a minor detail. Asking directly whether flashing will be replaced during a re-roofing project, not just the shingles on top of it. And scheduling periodic inspections, ideally after major storms, focused specifically on the intersections where flashing lives, the chimneys, valleys, skylights, and wall transitions, rather than just a quick glance at the shingles from the ground. For homeowners who already own their homes, a simple attic inspection twice a year can catch these problems long before they become expensive. Walking through the attic with a flashlight, looking for dark staining on the underside of the roof deck, checking for a musty smell, and feeling for soft or damp insulation near chimneys and vent pipes can reveal a small leak months or even years before it would otherwise show up as a stain on the ceiling below. What began as a single bent piece of metal hidden above a kitchen ceiling in Ohio turned into a lesson that applies to almost every home in America. The most expensive problems rarely come from the parts of a house people can see. They come from the small, overlooked details tucked into the transitions, the places where one material meets another, where shortcuts are easiest to take and hardest to notice until the damage is already done. A roof isn't just shingles laid across a slope. It's a system of careful decisions made at every intersection, and flashing is where those decisions matter most. Get it right, and it disappears into the background for decades, quietly doing its job through every storm. Get it wrong, and it becomes the hidden reason behind a leak that seems to come from nowhere, slowly spreading damage long before anyone realizes what's happening above their heads. If this kind of hidden construction mystery caught your attention, there are dozens more waiting to be uncovered. The small decisions during a build that end up determining whether a home stays safe and dry for decades or turns into a costly nightmare. Come back next time, because we're peeling back the walls, the foundations, and the roofs of real homes to show you exactly what's hiding where you'd least expect it.